Good morning. Thank you for coming up so early for this beautiful day and to participate in the ceremony. To kick things off, I'd like to introduce myself, Austin Sass, Mayor, City of South Lake Tahoe. I'll be your Master of Ceremonies for this morning. To start things, I'd like to invite Joanne Marquetta, Executive Director of the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, up to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Austin. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. On June 24th, 2007, embers from an illegal and abandoned campfire ignited the Angora fire, the most destructive wildlife fire in memory at Lake Tahoe, and one of the most destructive fires in all of California history. It destroyed 254 homes and structures in a matter of hours and burned 3,100 acres before it was fully contained by firefighters. From the earliest stages of the disaster, a generous and resilient Tahoe community arose and banded together to meet the challenges of rebuilding and restoring a sense of normalcy. The fire was a tragedy and a wake-up call for Tahoe. It showed wildfires can and will happen here and that we need to be prepared. Following the fire, a bi-state fire commission formed and developed 90 recommendations to reduce wildfire risk in the Tahoe Basin. Nearly all those recommendations have been implemented since the fire occurred. The painful memories of the Angora tragedy are still with us 10 years later, but the Tahoe Basin is a better place. It reminded us that as a community, we will and do work together for the greater good. It brought out the best of us as we work together to provide relief and support for those affected and for the heroic, very heroic first responders. More homeowners now have defensible space on their properties. The scars on the mountainside remind us to keep our antennas up during fire season and be alert for anything, and I mean anything, that could put us in a similar situation. Through diligent work by agencies and the Tahoe Fire Fuels and Fire Team, which formed shortly after the Angora fire to improve partnership and collaboration, thousands of acres of forest have been treated to reduce hazardous fuels. And agencies and residents at Tahoe are working together like nowhere else in the country to not only coordinate this important forest thinning work, but to educate the public about the importance of wildfire prevention and preparedness and to create fire-adapted communities. 4 days after the fire was put out, I happened to drive over Echo Summit from down in the valley. I still remember the moment I drove over Echo, and I was struck by the total lack of smoke and how there was not a whiff of anything that smelled like a fire. There was no haze, there was no smoke. It was perfectly natural. It was a reminder to me, and hopefully to all of us, that Mother Nature can heal that which we humans inflict upon ourselves. It's up to all of us now to make her job easier in this regard and to use best efforts to help her and not impede her progress in the recovery. This is our home. So let's be smart, let's be careful, and let's be aware. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to now introduce Tim Alameda, Lake Valley Fire Protection District Chief.
Thank you, everybody. A lot of the folks that we just had over at at the Myers Fire Station, Station 7 are here also. I want to speak just briefly about fire combat operations. We can have the best fire service, and we do have probably one of the very best fire services in the nation, if not in the world, and we're talking to different folks that are coming here to the lake to talk about the Angora fire. But if we, as a community, as a fire service, put all of our eggs in one basket, and we worry about nothing but fire combat operations, we're going to be a day late and a dollar short. It's up to us as firefighters to make sure that we understand and support totally fire prevention and a healthy forest. Because at the end of the day, that helps us to shape the battleground. That when we are called into service, that things are tipped into our side. It's a simple military concept. And if you take a look at the 10 and the 14s, or downhill line construction, or the basics of the NFPA for strategy and tactics for structure firefighting, it all comes back to what did we do before the fire or before the event to tip things in our direction. And so to all of my brothers and sisters that work in combat operations, don't forget the lessons learned and be not only understanding fire prevention and a healthy forest, but be part of that team also. It's really important to all of us. Thank you very much.
I'd now like to introduce Sue Novasel, El Dorado County Supervisor.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. The Angora fire truly was a firestorm. There were hurried evacuations. Some people were forced to leave with nothing but the clothes on their back and return to find nothing left. Lost belongings, family pictures, and keepsakes. The worst of all, lost homes and even those lovely pets. By midnight of the first day, 2,000 acres had burned, and it was only 5% contained. By morning, the next morning, over 220 homes were already destroyed. And through it all, there were heroes in this blaze who ignored the dangers and the threat upon their own lives, who worked to protect our community. Firefighters and first responders answered the call to fight this monster of a fire. I'd like to acknowledge any of the firefighters that were there over that 3 days. Please stand up. Do we have any? Tim, you know? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. As a 40-year resident of Myers, I can't tell you how much it meant to have all of you guys had our backs, and we appreciate it. And girls, thank you. Words cannot describe the thanks that our community owes to all of you. Some of those responders, even while their homes were being destroyed, were out saving ours. One such brave responder was El Dorado County Deputy Sheriff at the time, now our Under Sheriff, Randy Pashon. Randy went out despite his own home being at risk, went out and instead went door to door knocking on doors to make sure that everybody was safe. Incredibly, no one was hurt, and that was due in large part to those first responders. Thank you. I was on the school board at the time, and it was with great pride the word got around that there were firefighters that were graduates of South Tahoe High. And it was just amazing. It was remarkable because they got the word out to us that they were going to stand at that high school and they weren't going to let it burn. And they did, and they did a fabulous job. They vowed to save our schools, and that's just what they did. Our community banded together to help each other. In a community of our size, it seems as though we knew somebody who had lost everything. Grocery workers, small business owners, and teachers. They'd lost it all. A local assistance center was created at Lake Tahoe Community College. An evacuation center was set up at the city's recreation complex. The staff at Barton Hospital did a miraculous job of making sure everybody was safe. And through it all, 132 rooms were provided for over 400 evacuees, all within the first day or so. I personally recall a couple situations I want to share. The word got out for the need for cell phone chargers, and it became clear that the evacuees, on their rush to get out the doors, had grabbed their cell phones but forgot their chargers. And all they wanted to do was make a phone call to their loved ones to let them know they were safe. Another evacuee asked for running shoes, specific size, He was our PE teacher at the middle school. And all he wanted, he'd lost everything. He lost his home, he lost everything. All he wanted to do was go out for a run. It was a healing time for our community, truly. The response from our community was so great that a new organization was formed, the Lake Tahoe Angora Fire Fund. It was a nonprofit, it is a nonprofit group that was started by locals Pam Betancourt, and I don't know if Pam's here. Her husband is here, Bob. Thank you, and thanks so much to Pam. And also Dick Schwarty kept it alive, and thank you, Dick. It's still there. We still have a nonprofit, just in case it ever happens again, which we hope that it never happens. But if it happens again, we already are set up and ready to go. That makes a huge difference. Thank you to our community for doing that. And their immediate goal was to help those homeowners who needed to recoup some of the $150 million in losses that they suffered by this fire. Our community opened our hearts, our cupboards, and our closets, and especially our wallets, to help those in the most of need. And who can forget the incredible gift that one very famous basketball player gave? Questionably skilled in his golf, but a very good basketball player, Charles Barkley, who donated $100,000 to us, to the fire survivors. And as he put it, because I wanted the people to know we were not just having fun while they suffer. It was an incredible gift. Today, the Angora Fire Fund still exists, and God forbid another fire should happen, we know that they will be there, and we thank you for that. But please don't forget, very importantly, tomorrow we're going to have a celebration of Myers. And it's a celebration of resilience, of what our communities can do. And I really hope everyone comes. I know Leona Allen has been in charge and helping with that, and we really, really appreciate it. It's going to be from 10 to 3 at Tahoe Paradise Park, and I'd hope you'd all attend. And I just want to say that this is what our community does. We come together in times of need. We take care of each other, and I love that about our community. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sue. I'd like to introduce Ilano, Forest Supervisor, Tahoe National Forest, United States Fire Service.
I love this place. You know, if you're going to come out and listen to speeches on a Saturday morning, it's hard to pick a better spot than this. So thanks to the folks who picked this spot and organized this event. So on April 1st, 2007, I started as the Deputy Forest Supervisor for the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit of the United States Forest Service, managing about 185,000 acres of National Forest System land here. And then on April 15th, 2007, my wife and I closed on a home. We were very excited about it. And then on the morning of April 24th, 2007, the forest supervisor at the time, Terry Marceron, hopped on an airplane headed for the wilderness of Montana, and she said, "Okay, you're in charge." And I said, "Okay, no problem. It's beautiful, early summer. Nothing's going to really happen." And so in the afternoon, my wife and I decided, oh, well, we just bought this house. We're going to move in soon. Why don't we go over and paint? And so we loaded up, started loading up the car, and started driving over. And we saw this little thin smoke all of a sudden bump up into a crown fire. And I said, I think we're going to have to turn around. So we turned around, and by the time I got into the office, it was off and going. And I didn't see my family again for 2 weeks. But we immediately started trying to gather resources to come here and fight this fire. And some of the folks that you saw stand in the back were among the very, very first people out there. I remember seeing Steve Burns at the gun mount at like 11 o'clock at night, kind of disheveled and trying to catch his breath. I mean, folks were working really hard. I remember at 5 o'clock that day, we got a report that the first house had caught on fire. And so we started doing all kinds of things, including trying to run fire models, order more resources. You know, when a fire starts and it's a 10 by 10 fire, you never know what's going to happen, right? So you don't immediately call in the cavalry. We eventually did, but so at about 11 o'clock that night, Sunday the 24th, I got a report that my house was on fire, and at the time it was just like additional information. I was getting so much information. Where are we going to put the fire camp? The airplanes can't fly, this, that, and the other thing. And so like so many other folks that you've heard about, when you are focused on a task, you stay focused on that task, and so that's what I did. And at about 4 in the morning, Kit Bailey and I, hopefully some of you may know Kit. He is the fire chief for the Forest Service up here. We went on a little drive, and I have to tell you, it looked like a scene from some futuristic sci-fi Armageddon movie. Driving through that neighborhood at 4 in the morning, smoldering fires on every side of the road, burnt over vehicles. It was a scary sight. It was like nothing that I've ever seen before. And then by the next morning, when the cavalry started really arriving, if you saw the fire progression map, you know, by the next day, the vast majority of the fire, the vast majority of the destruction had occurred. And so we decided that that Monday night we'd try and create some space to bring the community together. And so Monday night we had a meeting at the middle school auditorium. We had 1,200 people there. Anyone here attend that meeting at the middle school? Good to see you again. You may remember that I opened that meeting by saying that at times like this, it's important for a community to have a space just to come together. You know, you'll get information, you'll get questions asked, but it's important for us to get together, just to be in one place together and to support one another. And I wish I could tell you that that's the whole of the story and that everyone responded in that way. But we all know that that's not exactly what happened. Because the reality is when people are hurt and angry, sometimes their reaction is to blame people and to express their anger. And that unfortunately started occurring that night and for some time afterwards. And if you were there, you know that there were public officials that had to be escorted out for fear of their safety. There were participants that had to be escorted out. And I think that it's important for us to remember those things also. And I'll tell you why. Because that's not the end of the story. Right? For a while, we struggled with, are we going to blame people or are we going to figure out how to come together? And the inspiring thing to me as a resident of this community is that this community decided to stop blaming each other and to come together. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's not easy to let go of that anger and that blame, but the people in this community were big enough to do that. And as a result, we together, the residents, the entities, the nonprofits, the government agencies have accomplished so much over half of the areas in the urban interface have been treated for hazardous fuels. Over 48,000 acres of forested lands have been treated to be healthier and have a reduced fuel loading. That wouldn't have happened if we had continued to say, no, it was that agency's fault or that agency's fault, or they won't let us do that or they won't let us do that. We actually came together, we took the lessons that there were to learn, and we tried to put them into practice. And even now, a couple of months ago, I attended a kickoff for a West Shore collaborative that's trying to bring together all the interested folks along the West Shore to treat and restore forest health to another 60,000 acres along the West Shore. How exciting is that? That people are taking action, because we all know, and I think a previous speaker said it, that there will be other fires. There will be other catastrophic events that occur. The climate is changing. It's creating new and increased intensive stresses on the resources that we depend upon and the forests that we live in. And so we have to do something. If we want to continue to survive and if we want to continue to live up here, we have to. And it's very mature of us as a community to understand that and to take action on it. So I have to say that I'm really proud to be a resident here and a part of this community, and a Forest Service employee. And I want you all to know that overcoming an event like this, working through the anger and the frustration and pulling ourselves together is what's going to make us successful in the long run in overcoming these new challenges that are bound to occur. You know, the Golden State Warriors have this mantra, stronger together, I think is what it is. And that's not just for a sports team, it's also for our community. And so I have a lot of hope that we're going to be successful in the future, because we have figured this out. And, you know, that's not to say that, like any community, any family, there are going to be struggles. We're going to get mad at each other on occasion. But knowing that we can get through it is huge. And so it's great to be here today. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for listening. And I look forward to spending some more time with you all in the future. Thanks a lot.
I'd like to introduce Chris Anthony, CAL FIRE Division Chief.
Good morning. My name is Chris Anthony. I work for CAL FIRE as the East Division Operations Chief here in South Lake Tahoe and Alpine County. Before I start, I really want to thank some people that have made this commemoration possible. And first, I'd like to thank Carolyn Grubb with Vahalla Tahoe for opening up this magnificent site to us. I'd also like to thank those that provided the guidance and direction for our event. Julie Reagan with TRPA, Heather Noel with the Forest Service, and Steve Teixeira with Sustainable Community Advocates. And then I also want to thank those that worked behind the scenes with the logistics for this event. That includes Lisa Herron, Ron Pevney, Bill Sanders with the Forest Service, Dusty Martin and Bryce Bennett with CAL FIRE, Dave Marion with the California Conservation Corps, as well as all the Corps members that are here today, and then also Leona Allen with the Lake Tahoe Community College Fire Academy and all the cadets that have been able to pull this together. So thank you very much. So this event, as well as all the activities that we have in June related to the Angora fire, are really indicative of this one fact, and that is that we as agencies are much more stronger working together than we are working by ourselves. And the only way we're going to be successful in meeting the myriad of challenges that face us is by continuing to work together as a team. As many of you know, fires in the West are only getting larger and more damaging. We're seeing more acres burned, fires that are more severe, loss of life, property damage, and significant impacts to our forests and watersheds. In fact, When you look at the top 20 largest wildland fires that have occurred in California over the last 20 years, you'd expect a fairly wide distribution of large fires over an 85-year time period. However, what we find is that a majority of those fires, 15 out of 20, have occurred just since 1990. It seems counterintuitive to me that we would have that many large fires in such a short amount of time, considering that our fire protection system is more robust than ever. We have more firefighters, fire engines, hand crews, specialized equipment, larger air tankers than we did back in the 20th century. But in the western United States, more acres burned in each of the last 2 decades of 1990 and 2000 than any other previously recorded. Our fire seasons are getting longer, up to 78 days longer in the West than just 3 to 4 decades ago. Our winter snowpacks are on the decline, and we've seen a steady rise of 2 degrees in our climate over the last 100 years. And our forests, which were once adapted to low-intensity fires, are now excessively overdense and overstocked, which make them more susceptible to drought, disease, insects, and wildfire. In CAL FIRE, we call many of these changes the new normal. Another significant issue, if that's not depressing enough, that we're facing is tree mortality, both on a statewide and a local issue. In October of 2015, Governor Brown proclaimed a state of emergency due to tree mortality throughout the central and southern Sierra of California. At the time, it was estimated that there were 22 million dead trees. Today, that number has risen to 102 million dead trees, covering a 7 million acre area, with the majority of the mortality in a 10-county area stretching from Kern County all the way up to Placer County. And unfortunately, many of the same factors that contribute to the larger wildland fires that we have also play a role in tree mortality. Drought conditions, overstocked forests, a changing climate, and shorter winters. The Angora fire was a catalyst for change in the Lake Tahoe Basin, and much of the work that has been completed over the past 10 years must continue as we continue to face the threat for wildfire, but also we face new threats such as tree mortality. That is why the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, as well as so many others, are so committed to implementing fuels reduction projects around the lake, as well as supporting projects at a landscape level, such as Lake Tahoe West, that will increase forest health and resiliency over time. We also need to be vigilant to continue to implement the recommendations that came out of the Emergency California-Nevada Tahoe Basin Fire Commission. Those recommendations were the result of public, stakeholder, and agency input, and they were based on the findings of the commission. And they serve as a reminder of the ongoing actions that we need to push forward. In closing, I'd like to stress that, although we've made tremendous progress, we can't become complacent. We can't forget the lessons that were learned from the Angora fire or rest on the laurels of our past accomplishments. The threat of wildfire to our communities is real, and to me, it only seems to be increasing. We must continue to implement a cohesive strategy that involves fuels reduction work to make our forests more resilient to wildfire. We must look at ways to continually improve our response to wildfires, and we must work more closely with our communities so that residents and visitors can make their homes and neighborhoods more fire safe. And we also need to be willing to ask tough questions about any barriers that may stand in our way to implement common sense projects. So we can't be successful without the interagency cooperation and collaboration that's embodied in the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, without the guidance and direction of our elected representatives and agency executives, and most importantly, without the support of the communities that we're charged to protect. Thank you.
It's great knowing we have all this expertise in place. Makes you feel a lot safer. I'd like to introduce Leona Allen. She's a Myers resident, and she's also a Lake Valley Fire Protection District board member.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want to? No.
Can we go to Kacey first?
Okay. I'm flexible.
Well, changing batting order. Kacey, Acting State Forester in the Nevada Division of Forestry.
Good morning, everyone. Prior to the Angora fire, a badge with this title on it would have been considered to have taken the wrong turn, being this far into California, right? So as stated, Kacey, Acting State Forester for the Nevada Division of Forestry. The Nevada Division of Forestry was not a part of the suppression response for the Angora fire. That's not to state blame, it just, our policies and our procedures at the time didn't really allow for the interstate coordination that we now have. So as many have talked about before, we as agencies can tend to get focused in the past, I would say, maybe sometimes now, can tend to get focused on the jurisdictions that we are responsible for, the areas in which we have responsibility. And it's hard to look at your neighbors and understand that if we all did work together, we would be better and stronger. And Angora Fire and the Bi-State Commission that came out of that really did bring that to the forefront for us. We've made a lot of progress in that area. Wildfires and natural resource disasters don't respect jurisdictions, and so thus as agencies, we had to learn how to not respect that too, through budgeting processes, through our own policies and procedures, and it's oftentimes a struggle. So I think that we have made really good progress on that. I would like to mimic what Chris said as far as we're not all the way there. We still have a lot of work to go. You know, the three areas I focused on for the progress that we have made are safe and effective response. We do coordinate better resources across state lines now. We have better interagency and interlocal agreements, interstate agreements to now order closest resources through both dispatch centers in California and Nevada. We also have interagency training opportunities. We take the time to train staff from all departments and across land management agencies, both in fuel reduction and in wildland firefighting. And we do that more now than we ever have. The second area was fire-adapted communities. Prevention and education campaigns through the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, through Living with Fire, through the public information officers that we all have, a unified message that's consistent across all agencies, because the fire threat isn't different when it changes from Forest Service boundaries to the state boundary. It's the same, and so we now have that unified all-agency message, and it's a much stronger message when it comes from all of us. At times in the past, we had tended to be a little bit confusing with our mixed messaging based on jurisdictions, and homeowners and residents would wonder, what are we trying to say? And sometimes I think we wondered that. And this is a much better progress that we've made. The final one is the resilient landscapes. In Nevada, we got Assembly Bill 75, which requires us on the Nevada side of the basin to report the progress that we've made every year to our legislators and tell them what we've done. Just since 2007, on the Nevada side, 16,872 acres of land treated in the wildland-urban interface. It's pretty amazing the difference. You can see it visibly when you drive anywhere around this lake on the California side as well. I've grown up here, I've recreated here since I was a kid, and it's a visible difference in the land and the forest today than it was when I was a kid. Just this year alone, 2,507 acres treated on the Nevada side. I think that all of these treatments offer less opportunities for devastation when insect and disease come in, when fire comes in. It keeps it to that lower intensity that we're looking for. But as Chris just stated, we still do have a very real risk of wildland fire here. I think one thing that we still need to work on, we implemented a lot of what that the Bi-State Commission had said to implement as agencies. One thing that's still needed is biomass utilization, and we need to work on that as agencies, because where is all this stuff going? We have large areas outside the WUI that we're now going to be turning to, and where is all that going to go? So we need to work together and figure out how we get that out safely and effectively to treat these communities. And I guess just in closing, I want to restate that we really have come a long way. Again, I'm not lost. I think we're all found in that this is how we should always be working together across jurisdictional boundaries, sharing the resources we have. We'll never have enough to meet the needs of what we have in front of us, but together we're a lot stronger than we are individually. And like I had said, wildland fires and natural resource emergencies, they don't respect those jurisdictional boundaries, so we have to get better at not respecting them ourselves as agencies, as homeowners, as residents. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Forrest Schafer, Tahoe Fire and Fuels Team Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Sass, and thank you to everybody for attending today. I'm Forrest Schafer. I'm an employee of the California Tahoe Conservancy, but most of my efforts are focused on supporting the efforts of agencies that are working together throughout the Lake Tahoe Basin to make a true impact in the health of our forests and in the resilience of our communities to wildland fire. So we have a short panel set up today to be able to provide some context for what's occurred, what the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team has been working on, and really where we need to go in the future. And really all of the work that we're doing stems from the uncertainty, the confusion, the fear, but later the resilience and strength of the South Lake Tahoe community and the Lake Tahoe Basin community as a whole in rebuilding and responding to the threat of wildfire. And to provide that, Leona Allen, a longtime Myers resident, will provide some experiences of what it was like to live through the Angora fire, but also to rebuild. Today we also have Kate Dargan. Kate Dargan was the state fire marshal for the state of California, but importantly was the co-chair of the Blue Ribbon Commission called by the governors of Nevada and California to really provide guidance to the communities and to the agencies on how to prevent such a disaster from occurring again in the future. We're pleased to have Jim Lawrence, Deputy Director for the Nevada Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, to provide some perspective that as we move forward from these recommendations at a state level, what sort of changes have been made and how are efforts to reduce wildfire risk being supported at all levels of government down to the community. I'll provide a little bit of background on the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, and Elwood Miller with University of Nevada Cooperative Extension will really provide a vision for the future of how we can change our relationship with wildland fire. So to start out, Leona Allen.
I was born here in Tahoe. In fact, it was so long ago that my birth certificate says Bijou, California, because there was no city of South Lake Tahoe. And I lost my home in the Angora fire, but I don't think that the story should be mine. I think it should be that of my parents, and especially of my father. At the age of 90, he lost everything except for the clothes on his back and the wallet in his pocket. In fact, I'm wearing the belt that he was wearing that day. But even he said it. We got our community back after this fire. This community is amazing. We hear these stories of survival and resilience over and over again, but they keep coming and people keep helping. And I happened to be in the communications center at the day of the fire, and I remember within 30 minutes of the first fire call, we had people calling in saying, what can I do? How can I help? And I think that's what our community is all about, and I'm just so proud and so grateful to be a member of this community. Chief Anthony said it earlier, that we are stronger when we work together, and that is absolutely truth, and that's why our communities work so well. So I'm going to be really brief here. I'm just going to say, what did we learn? As homeowners, as community members, what did we learn? Number one, evacuation preparedness is huge. We have to be prepared. We get complacent. We had a big winter this year. We all think, oh, no problem, we have all this moisture. No, we need to be prepared. As homeowners, as business people, we need to be ready for that. The second lesson is that defensible space works. It works. My home actually would have been saved except for this big wooden deck that I had. But when we pulled up to the structure afterwards Everything around the structure, the garden, the trees, the flowers, had been preserved because we had immaculate defensible space. We just happened to have a wooden deck. So defensible space works, and we need to be accountable for that. We need to take action, and we need to do that. We need to do that now. We need to use the resources and the fire agencies around us to help with that. And the last thing we learned is that, yes, we are resilient. We've made it, and we are survivors. So thank you, community of Tahoe, for being what you are.
Hello, Kate Dargan. It's an honor to share this time and space with you today, and I speak especially to those of you who have been hard at work for the past 10 years, working on the findings and recommendations that the Tahoe Fire Commission left you with 10 years ago. I also want to say that I'm also pleased to announce that I'm a new neighbor, as my husband and I have relocated up to Incline Village. So yay. So as the first reports of the fire started to arrive in Sacramento on the first day, we realized that it was going to be an historically damaging fire to both the community and to the environment of Lake Tahoe. The economy, the Tahoe Blue future, and to the responders and the agencies that were involved. And odd as it may sound, one of my first actions the second morning of the fire, as the reports of the devastated structures started to arrive, was to request and receive permission to immediately deploy a damage assessment team to the location. Before we were even done with putting out the burning structures themselves, that team was on the road and got up here that night of the second day, that evening of the second day, to gather photographic and material evidence of how the structures burned, what occurred, so that we could learn from this devastating experience. And the materials and the photographs that they gathered, the trampoline, the plastic lawn furniture, the awnings, have fueled literally 10 years of ember research in the scientific community on how structures are damaged and destroyed in wildfire. And that would not have happened without that early permission of the fire ground commanders, who took a few moments to say, yes, send the damage assessment team, and brought them in. And then as the fire was extinguished and the immediate issues of medical care, shelter, trauma care were established, attention was turned to addressing the lesson learned and the slow process of rebuilding the homes, communities, the careers, the economy, and the treasured Tahoe environment. The commission was established by the two state governors, Governor Schwarzenegger and Governor Sandoval, and I was selected as the California co-chair by Governor Schwarzenegger, and joined by the Nevada co-chair, Sig Rogich. Here's what the two of us faced. The community was angry, and there was a toxic atmosphere of blame, hurt, loss, and long-standing frustrations that needed an outlet. Sig Rogich and I did not know each other, had never worked together before, and our two states had different priorities for the outcome. But we agreed on these things: to put people and the environment first and politics last. To create a way ahead and not a report. Nothing that would disappear, but something that would live on. So we started the commission with these three goals. Spoken not necessarily to the community at large, but they were our guiding principles. To listen more than we spoke. To invite the world of passionate believers and experts that are part of the Tahoe community to be an active part of the process. And to foster healing between the agencies so that when our work was done, it was those relationships that would carry the momentum forward. So to do that, we undertook an exceedingly difficult process of 19 public hearings over a 7-month period with a 17-person commission, a handful of temporary staff, and an average meeting attendance of 30 to 50 people, all of which wanted something to say for each hearing. And then we invited anyone, and I mean anyone, who thought they had a solution to submit their idea. And without going into the painful detail, we produced the Tahoe Commission report with its 90 recommendations and then set it loose to find its way. We had chosen this unique process and format for that report with its findings and recommendations, and truth be told, it was a gamble. We made very specific recommendations that were tied to actions and to specific agencies. And if the work was done, a lot of folks should get a lot of credit. And if it was ignored, we tried to leave a clear trail to seek out and ask why not. We tried to pin things down and give as little wiggle room as possible to the solutions that we needed, or that we believe needed to be implemented to the future Lake Tahoe and its communities of every type. So I'm here today to give you my personal report on that progress. Your leaders, your agencies, your neighbors, and your responders have not failed you. You have succeeded. You've made a difference, and you should be celebrated today for the hard work that you have done. Not to say that we're completely finished, but this progress is amazing. Over 90% of those 90 recommendations have been initiated, are in progress, or have been completed. Yeah. This needs to be shouted around the world as a model for restoration and recovery after devastating fires. What do you think Portugal is going through right now with 60-some dead? This is a worldwide problem. The solutions that you have implemented here make a difference in your community, and there are literally hundreds or thousands of communities around this world that need to hear the successes that you've brought. So my challenge to you as I leave the stage is to speak to those of you who have been the leaders and the doers for the past 10 years. For a few of you to come together and to speak out on the lessons that you have achieved these last 10 years, and to speak that as a lighthouse to the world, because this story needs to be told, not just to yourselves, but to the world. Thank you. And I would like to introduce, representing the co-chair of the Nevada side of the commission, Chief Deputy Director Jim Lawrence for the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and also the chair of TRPA Governing Board.
So good morning. It is, I have to say my emotions have been swinging back and forth sitting up on this stage. It is always a pleasure to be at Lake Tahoe, particularly on a beautiful day like this, and my heart soars when I come here. But to listen to these stories, I remember where I was specifically on the day of the Angora fire. I was living in Carson City at the time, and I decided to take a nice little hike up to Snow Valley Peak on the east shore of Lake Tahoe. And I was on top of that peak eating some sort of snack, and I saw the little wisp of smoke. And my entire hike back to the Spooner Trailhead, I could just see that grow and grow and grow. And it just left a pit in my stomach as I was hiking back to my car. And to be on the stage here is, it's kind of bringing back those memories, because this is such a beautiful place for all of us. But at the same time, this is really a celebration, because so much great work has been accomplished since the Angora fire. As Kate said, I do kind of wear two hats this morning. I'm proud to represent the state of Nevada as Deputy Director of Conservation and Natural Resources, and also Chair of the TRPA Governing Board. And this morning when I started thinking about what I wanted to say regarding the findings of the Bi-State Commission, I started to kind of bifurcate things, and I started making lists TRPA-wise and then state of Nevada-wise. And I thought to myself, I really didn't learn anything from the Bi-State Commission, because that is absolutely not the way we look at things or how we do work in the Tahoe Basin anymore, and that is wonderful. I will touch on a few things that I'm very proud of the accomplishments, and I also want to really acknowledge Kate. I was not part of the commission. I attended a few of the meetings, and between Kate and Sid Rogich, they did just a phenomenal job with that Bi-State Commission. So I'm going to touch on a couple of things, largely on how agencies work together in the form of regulatory streamlining, and a little bit on governance structure. So one of the things that came out of the Bi-State Commission is we need to do more on defensible space, and we need to be more proactive on pre-suppression, and we need our regulatory agencies to work together and basically facilitate the work and not be an obstacle to the work. And I'm really proud to say that particularly on the California side, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and the Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board are now working hand in hand to make sure that the work that we need to do for defensible space is being facilitated, and we're getting the work done, and we're getting the treatment done in order to protect our communities and the landscape. We also have several memorandums of understanding in place between the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and all of the public agencies to make sure that we are doing the work on those public lots that are in the communities, the lots we call the urban lots. We learned from the Angora fire just how critical those urban lots were to have a staging place for the firefighters, to protect the communities, and we need to do so much more work. So we now have agreements in place to facilitate that work, and we have accomplished so much in getting those urban lots treated. I want to talk a little bit about kind of how the governance structure has changed. Our acting state forester for the state of Nevada, Kacey, mentioned Assembly Bill 75, which was one of the recommendations that came out of the Bi-State Commission. What that requires our state forester to do is to annually give a report to the governor, to our legislators, to TRPA, and to our congressional delegation on the state of our forest here in Lake Tahoe and the work that's being accomplished. Now, I've worked for the public sector for a long time, and reports don't always, sometimes reports sit on shelves. This report has always led to action. It leads to action from our governors, from our legislatures, and our congressional delegation are going to bat for Lake Tahoe constantly, particularly in the area of fuels reduction. Specifically, as an example, just this last legislative session, we have a Lake Tahoe committee dedicated to Tahoe that meets in the interim. That report, along with testimony, leads to action. And it's a small example, but it's critical. This last interim committee sponsored legislation, Senate Bill 499, which streamlines work between our Division of Forestry and our fire protection districts and our communities and homeowners in order to get defensible space work and to kind of cut through the red tape. We found that we were being duplicative still, and we're taking action. The other thing that this report leads to, and our legislative committee, is this committee sponsored a bill to continue our 10-year commitment up at Lake Tahoe. So that was extended another 10 years to continue on with our commitment at Tahoe for forest and fuels work and environmental protection projects. The governor's budget, also approved by the legislature, included $5 million for the next biennium in order to do Tahoe work up here, and that includes a lot of augmentation to our existing work that we dedicate to forest and fuels work. So those are just some of the examples of kind of how we've changed the streamlining up here at Lake Tahoe, as well as the governance structure. But even more importantly, you can get the policies in place, you can get the money, but the work has to get done. And I am so proud of everybody here on the stage and the work that gets done. And with that, I don't want to steal any of the thunder from Forrest Schafer, who I've had the pleasure of working with for a number of years now. He is the coordinator for the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, and the work they do is phenomenal. And without their work, none of the projects would be coordinated like they are up here in Tahoe now, and we would not be getting nearly as much work as happened since the Angora fire. So with that, I'll introduce Forrest Schafer.
Thank you, Jim. Listening to the stories, being intimately familiar with the progress and with the 90 recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Commission report, we look at those 90 recommendations and they cover things ranging from increasing long-term sustainable funding to coordinating on regulations and increasing the pace of fuel reduction treatments and providing assistance and support to homeowners, to residents that are implementing work on their own property. But above all, the recommendation, the overarching recommendation, the overarching piece is to strengthen partnerships. And those partnerships had been built prior to the Angora fire. And after such a devastating event, things could have gone in a much different direction. But with the support of the recommendations and the support of leadership from state, federal, local government, community leadership, elected leaders, and the constituents we all serve, those partnerships were able to be strengthened after the Angora fire, and it speaks to the resilience of the Lake Tahoe community. The crux of it is that none of us stand alone in the efforts that we're working on. And there's no way to implement 90 recommendations regarding deregulation and funding and fuel reduction and community engagement if we're working alone. So the primary directive from that report is we need to build partnerships and we need to work together. The Tahoe Fire and Fuels team was formed in 2008, shortly after the Angora fire. And recognizing that we can't stand alone, how can we build those partnerships and finding ways to share resources and work together in the Lake Tahoe Basin, which can be such a complex area, to be able to change things like regulation and to be able to do more fuel reduction and to be able to communicate in a consistent way across so many agencies and so many jurisdictions to create that unified messaging on what we're all working toward. Just as none of us stand alone as agency employees, as members of the community, the work that needs to be done doesn't stand alone. Each of those categories of recommendations, whether it's streamlining regulations across multiple agencies, including Water Control Board and the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and state regulation and federal regulation, whether it's increasing the amount of fuel reduction in forest health improvement projects that occur on all ownerships, whether it's urban lots right next to your home owned by the state or by the U.S. Forest Service, or whether it's your own property, being able to increase the work that occurs, and meanwhile being prepared for that next wildfire that occurs. All of that supports the efforts of firefighting suppression resources. And none of those things, resilient landscapes to fire, communities that are adapted and ready to withstand a wildfire, and coordinated, well-trained suppression resources, without those three things, we could easily face another situation like the Angora fire. I was born in the Lake Tahoe Basin. My dad, Brian, was the chief of Lake Valley Fire shortly prior to the Angora fire. My brother Keegan, in the audience today, manages the Tahoe Douglas Crew program. And what the stories today really bring to me is recognizing that whether you're an agency employee, whether you're an elected official, or you work for some organization, or you're just a member of this community. We are all members of this community. And so I'm so privileged to share the stage today with people who set the stage for the work that we're doing across all of these agencies to be able to improve our safety from wildfire by the legacy that has been set that allows us to continue to work and to be effective. As members of the community, we're working on changing our relationship with wildfire, and creating communities that are adapted to fire is our solution for doing that. And Elwood Miller, my mentor, will be providing the information on that. Thank you.
So if you don't like anything that Forrest said, I guess it's my fault. What a gorgeous day, and it's great to see all of you here on this anniversary. It's certainly a privilege and honor to share this podium and the stage with the speakers. And anniversaries are a time of celebration for sure, and we have a lot to celebrate. And you've heard the reports, the progress, all of the efforts that have resulted in progress as it relates to living with wildfire. I'm currently the coordinator of the fire adapted communities in the state of Nevada, the network of those communities. I'm also a member of the Living with Fire team, and that is also an honor and a privilege. That team is sitting right here in the front row, and the Living with Fire team has done an absolutely incredible job in terms of helping bring information and education to people that need it, and they need to know what they can and should do in regard to living with wildfire. And while anniversaries are a time of celebration, they're also a time of reflection. It's a time to take stock in terms of, how did we get to where we are, and then, where do we need to go from here? For centuries, probably even thousands of years, in this basin, nature utilized a landscape maintenance service that every decade or so would clean up all the accumulated litter and debris, would thin the trees and brush to desirable spacing, favored tree species that were more adaptable to the site. It applied mineral fertilizer to the soil, it pruned the lower branches on the remaining trees, and created an ideal soil condition for the establishment of a new crop of trees. This service was highly dependable and readily available somewhere every year. The forest that resulted from this landscape maintenance service was park-like. It's described in the annals of history as being park-like, with well-spaced, large pine trees like we see here dominating the scene. Now, over the past 100 years, two situations have arisen that significantly altered this natural outcome. First, the benefits of continued dependence on this landscape maintenance service were overshadowed by what people saw as destructive and dangerous consequences of its methods. Now, it's true the destructive force of the service left human misery and resource loss in its wake at times. So it was decided that the landscape maintenance service had to be let go. And not just let go, but totally shut down, totally put out of business. But the service balked and was resilient and continued to show its presence in a variety of locations at various times. So an army was raised to really put this service, now considered an evil enemy, in its place. A bear was brought in to help drive home the message. Nature's landscape maintenance service that I'm referring to was, of course, fire. The war was waged, and mostly successful. However, the unintended consequences to the forest were staggering. The periodic removal of accumulated litter and debris ceased, allowing it to build up year after year. And the thinning of trees ended, allowing many times more trees to establish and occupy space that would naturally occur. And the mixture of trees changed, allowing species more prone to intense fire and intense burning to dominate. Now comes a second situation. Into this human-altered and fire-prone forest came people. People seeking all the benefits that accompany a tranquil, aesthetically beautiful, natural setting, especially one that has the crown jewel of Mountain Lake sitting in the middle. Accompanying the people was the invasion of a totally alien, unnatural, but extremely dangerous fuel. Houses, other buildings, fences, landscaping structures were inserted into a fire-dependent forest system that was already primed for trouble. Firefighting forces sworn to protect life and property were now faced with the extreme danger associated with a combination of both structure and forest fires. The reality of the consequences associated with this combination came home to roost in the Angora fire. And not just the Angora fire, but the Rim fire, the King fire, and so on it goes across the West. Despite the use of aircraft, heavy equipment, thousands of firefighters, and spending over $1 billion, the era of the mega fire has overwhelmed our fire control resources. Now something has to change. Since the protection of human life and property are the highest priorities of our firefighting service, it follows that the most important change falls to the vulnerable people who have chosen to reside or visit where the occurrence of fire is a realistic expectation. Circumstances have changed, and to survive the changed circumstances requires people to adapt. People have to change their perception, the way they think about the place where they live or where they visit. And their view must include the prospect of fire and the way they see things. The reality of fire must become a serious and routine part of the culture of their community. When I use the word community, I'm not talking about place, I'm talking about people. A community forms when like-minded people come together around a common goal or to address a common issue, like surviving wildfire. When their vulnerability sinks in and they begin to change their behavior, they are adapting to the reality of fire as part of the community culture. They are taking steps to prepare for the eventuality of wildfire. And they are preparing to survive. They are taking the necessary steps to become a fire-adapted community. So, what is a fire-adapted community? This is Elwood Miller's definition. A fire-adapted community is one where the people have integrated their vulnerability into the community's culture and have fully prepared themselves, their homes, and the landscape where they live to survive the occurrence of wildfire. Now, the Living with Fire team at the University of Nevada Cooperative Extension has made available award-winning publications, other forms of information. They can conduct workshops, educational activities to help people learn how to prepare and how to adapt. This includes how to create defensible space, what locations on your home are likely to catch fire from embers, and what to think about if the call to evacuate comes. One of the first stops to begin adapting to the changed circumstances that we face is the website livingwithfire.info. Building that community is also important. The Tahoe network of fire-adapted communities spearheaded by the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team and the Tahoe Resource Conservation District is here to help form and build the community. We all must be about the survival of people, homes, and landscapes in the face of the growing threat from wildfire. And let us never forget that when we talk about survival, we're also talking about survival of the firefighters, the men and women sworn to our protection. They deserve to go home as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Elwood. Elwood, at the end of next week, will be retiring for the fourth, and we're told, final time. Elwood came out of retirement in 2002 to found the Nevada Fire Safe Council, began working to support Lake Tahoe Basin communities. He came out again in 2008 to really provide the vision and the structure for the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team. Just recently again, a couple of years ago, to provide support and develop the concept for the Tahoe Network of Fire-Adapted Communities and the Nevada Network of Fire-Adapted Communities. It's a tradition in the fire service that when a firefighter retires, they're presented a fire axe. But Elwood's tool is really in the work that happens before the fire. And Elwood is, with over 40 years of experience in forest management, spanning the Forest Service, as a professor at the University of Nevada, and now with University of Nevada Cooperative Extension, is the consummate woodsman, and recognizing that prevention is such an important tool to be able to provide that safety for firefighters and for the fire adaptation of our communities. So from myself on behalf of the staff of the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, and from Chief Alameda as the chair of the coordinating group, fire chiefs and agency executives overseeing the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, we present this hatchet to Dr. Elwood Miller in honor of his dedication and service protecting lives, property, and the environment from catastrophic wildfire in the Lake Tahoe Basin. Thank you, Elwood. We will miss you, but we're so thankful for the legacy that you've provided us.
This is totally unexpected and a bit overwhelming. I first laid eyes on the Tahoe Basin in August 1970, and it was love at first sight. And I've been, I think, involved in one way or another ever since. And it's been such a privilege to work with the citizens, and in particular the fire service, to work with individuals who are mission-driven and dedicated to a cause. There's absolutely nothing better than that. No board can compare with that, and it's been such a privilege. But thank you also very, very much.
Following efforts to prepare for wildfire, inevitably we will be impacted by wildfire. And the efforts that are undertaken in communities to rebuild, to restore a sense of normalcy to that community are paramount. And it takes leadership and it takes dedication to provide that. Norma Santiago, on the Board of Supervisors at the time of the Angora fire, worked tirelessly and provided intense efforts to develop protocols for cleanup, for rapid reconstruction, and was a figurehead in the community in the efforts to rebuild, and is still actively engaged in fuel reduction and restoration projects in the Lake Tahoe Basin. And we're so thankful to have Norma here today. And on behalf of the team, with Chief Alameda as chair, we'd like to present to Norma Santiago in recognition of exemplary community service for her caring and leadership in the cleanup and restoration of neighborhoods in the Angora fire and burn area. Your contributions will always be remembered.
Wow. This is so unexpected, and I will tell you what I told the members of the community when we first talked about rebuilding, and this was like on July 5th, 27, and I saw out there people who had lost their homes, and I had a whole bunch of staff behind me, El Dorado County staff. And I flat out said that this isn't about me, this isn't about our staff, this is all about you and getting you back into your homes. The things that came out and the Angora protocols in 2014 were adopted by FEMA as a response to a catastrophic event. And with all of that, given all the things that have happened, you have heard it over and over again. It is our resilience as a community that moves us forward, that helps us come together and find solutions and work together and get things really accomplished. We live in times that are very divisive. But I tell you that within each and every one of you is that capacity to reach out to one another and let's work together, because there is still a lot of work to be done. I am incredibly honored by this that I've received today. But I can tell you that it wasn't about me. It was about this community. It was about the leadership in some agencies. It was about El Dorado County and countless members of the staff that were here every day, making sure everybody was okay and making sure we were not getting in the way of them realizing their homes, realizing the rebuilding of their homes. It's not about me. It's about you. And I hope and pray every day that that resilience, that desire to come together and find really sustainable solutions to the challenges we face as a community, that resilience that we saw and experienced 10 years ago, we build on that and we continue with that as we move towards the future. Thank you so much for this incredible honor.
To close our ceremony today, we welcome Dave Titus. We're honored to have him with Chief of Staff with Senator Ted Gaines' office.
Thank you very much. In an ironic twist of history here, 10 years ago, I was the legislative deputy director for CAL FIRE during the Angora fire. And I started getting calls regularly from a particular state assemblyman and his chief of staff who were relentless in asking for information. And I had to continue to say, we'll get it for you, we'll get it for you. Well, I happen to now be working for him as his chief of staff, that very person who was relentless. So he apologizes for not being here, but we have a resolution here in remembrance of this day. On this day, we remember the 10th anniversary of the Angora fire. We honor the first responders who fought the fire, the law enforcement officers who evacuated people out of harm's way, the resilience of the Myers and South Lake Tahoe community in their dedication to rebuilding and supporting their neighbors, and the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team for diligently working to improve fire preparedness. Once again, the senator is apologized that he can't be here, but thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you to all the speakers that came today. It was great. And I have to tell you, as someone that not only lives in Lake Tahoe, but absolutely is in love with Lake Tahoe, I take advantage of everything this area has to offer, whether it's mountain biking, skiing, hiking, or getting out on the water. And when you hear about the coordination, the communication, the cooperation, and the education being put forth by the numerous agencies, I just feel safer being out there, whether it's up at Star Lake or at Snow Valley Peak. I do feel safer. I'd also like to leave a final thought for all of you who may be newer to Tahoe than perhaps me. I've been here 42 years. Over the 42 years, there's been a lot of toxicity between the public and certain agencies. There's been toxicity and competition between agencies. We are at a point now where I can honestly tell you, and I'm not shining anybody's shoes here, this is the God's honest truth. In the 42 years I've been here, this is the most positive I have ever seen the South Shore of Lake Tahoe. We work together, we communicate, we're trying to make things better, and I do believe that the vast majority of our residents view the world with a glass half full attitude, and those that view the world with a glass half empty attitude are shrinking, and they're shrinking fast. They're this big now, where maybe they were that big before. We are positive, we are prepared, and we live in a great place, and things are going to be great. Thank you for coming today.